The Ghost Fisherman of Grey Lake. There's a place tucked deep in the forest where the trees grow thick and tall and the ground is soft with moss. The locals call it Grey Lake Asterisk, though no one can remember why it got that name. It's a lake so quiet it's almost as if it's waiting for something to happen or perhaps for something to stop. Some say it's cursed, others say it's forgotten by time. The truth is somewhere between the stories, as all legends are. The fisherman, Samuel, was a part of this place long before the lake earned its haunting reputation. He was a quiet, solitary man, even when the town still saw him regularly. He worked his small fishing boat alone on the waters, even in his old age, though no one could remember when he started. It was as if he'd been born with that rod in his hands. For years, Samuel was the one who brought in the catches, who knew the lake better than anyone else. People trusted him, respected him, though they always felt there was something off about him. The strange part wasn't his isolation or his obsession with the lake. It was the asterisk way he fished. Samuel had never needed a net. He would set out, in the dark hours of the morning before the sun rose, casting his line into the fog-drenched waters, and somehow he would always return with a full basket. No one saw what he pulled out. There was always a shroud of mist hanging over the lake, thick enough to obscure anything that happened just beneath the surface. Yet his haul was always extraordinary, fish larger than anyone had ever seen in Grey Lake. Then over time the catches started to dwindle. Samuel came back empty-handed, sometimes for days at a time, and when he did return the look in his eyes had changed. His once sharp gaze became hollow, as if he was staring past the world. The townsfolk noticed this shift, and whispers began to spread like wildfire. It was said that Samuel had started talking to the lake itself, his boat rocking in the water while he muttered strange words, sometimes out loud, sometimes to no one in particular. People began to wonder if Samuel had finally lost his grip on reality, but none of them dared ask him about it directly. After all, who could challenge someone who had fished that cursed lake for as long as he had? And then one night he vanished. The storm that night was nothing short of unnatural. The wind howled through the trees, shaking their branches like violent fists. Rain fell in sheets and the fog rolled in so thick that the world seemed to disappear into it. Yet Samuel went out, alone as always. When the storm finally passed, the town went looking for him, finding only his boat washed up on the shore. His fishing rod was left behind, tangled in the net, but there was no sign of Samuel. It was as though he'd been swallowed whole by the lake, taken by the very thing he had spent so much of his life seeking. Years passed. Grey Lake became an eerie place, and the town slowly fell into superstition. People would sometimes see ripples in the water late at night, strange disturbances that looked like the movement of a boat. But there were no boats on the lake, and no one dared fish there. But it wasn't until the group of young men came to the lake that the story truly deepened into terror. It was the late fall when the four friends decided to challenge the legend. They were seasoned fishermen, arrogant enough to scoff at the idea of a ghostly fisherman haunting the lake. They had heard the stories, but they were skeptical, laughing at the idea that some old man's spirit could control the waters. It was all just folklore, right? That's what they told themselves as they drove up to the lake one chilly evening, the mist already hanging low in the trees. They set up their camp by the water's edge, casting their lines into the darkened depths. The water was unnaturally still, so much so that it felt like the lake was holding its breath. The young men joked about the ghost fisherman, mocking the idea of an old man still trying to catch fish in his ghostly boat. As night fell, the temperature plummeted and the fog seemed to grow thicker. "Dude, I can barely see my hand in front of my face," one of them, Mike, said, chuckling nervously. "This place is seriously creeping me out." "Yeah, well," said Ben, the most skeptical of the group, "maybe we'll see a ghost fish too." He laughed, but his eyes kept darting to the water. That was when it happened. One of the guys, Steve, looked out across the lake and noticed something strange. A shadow. It was moving slowly, drifting across the water. At first he thought it was just a trick of the fog, but the shape began to take form. It was a small, old boat, paddling itself across the lake, rocking gently with each wave. The fog made it hard to see, but Steve could make out the figure of a man hunched over the edge of the boat. The man's hands were long, thin, almost skeletal, gripping the oars with unsettling precision. "Hey, guys," Steve whispered, not wanting to make a sound. "There's something out there." The others turned, and for a moment they all just stared. The boat seemed to glide through the water unnaturally, cutting through the fog like a knife. The figure at the helm never moved. He was as still as the water itself. "Holy crap," Mike said, his voice trembling. Is that the fisherman?" Before anyone could answer, the figure in the boat turned. The movement was slow, deliberate, and then they saw his face. It was Samuel's face. The skin was pale, almost gray, and stretched tight over the skull. His eyes were black, the pupils gone, leaving only dark pits where his gaze should be. His mouth was thin, cracked like dry leather, and as he opened it to speak, the words came out in a rasping whisper that seemed to vibrate the very air. "Looking for something to catch?" he asked, his voice echoing from the depths of the lake itself. The friends froze, unable to move. The boat drifted closer, but as it did, the mist grew thicker, and suddenly the figure was no longer visible. "Gone." But the whispers continued. They seemed to come from everywhere, from the water, from the trees, from the very air they breathed. They tried to leave, but the moment they turned to pack up their things, something strange happened. The air thickened. The weight of the fog pressed down on them. Then, without warning, a splash rang out from the water. One of the guys, Mike, screamed as he was yanked backward by something invisible, his hands slipping from the ground. He clawed at the air, his fingers brushing the surface of the lake before he vanished beneath the waves. The remaining three didn't hesitate. They ran. They didn't care about their gear or the boat. All they cared about was getting away. But the lake wasn't finished with them. As they made their way through the fog, the air grew colder. And then, one by one, each of them started to hear the same thing, the sound of a fishing rod being reeled in. It wasn't the sound of their own lines. It was something else. Ben was the last to see it. Just before he was pulled into the water, he looked back to see a shadowy figure, Samuel's boat, drifting silently behind him. The old man, or whatever he had become, was reeling in his line, slowly, deliberately, pulling something from the water. And as Ben screamed, the surface of Grey Lake became still once more. The search party found nothing but the remnants of the camp, and a ripple on the lake that would never fade. Some say that Samuel's spirit never left Grey Lake, but that it waits still for new souls to cast their lines into the cursed waters. And if you listen closely at night, you might hear the creaking of an old boat, the whisper of a voice lost to time, still searching for the one thing that will never return. Would you risk your life to fish at Grey Lake?